Police found 72-year-old gallery owner Richard Hartwell stabbed multiple times in his luxury penthouse, surrounded by priceless paintings now destroyed by fire. The killer had tried to burn away the evidence, but what they didn't expect was to be caught red-handed 4 blocks away, still carrying the murder weapons and unable to keep their story straight. 2:30 a.m., Miami Beach, Florida. Ocean Drive was still buzzing with late-night partygoers when Officer Maria Santos spotted him, a disheveled man in torn clothes, stumbling down the sidewalk, clutching something in each hand. Vincent Torres, 34, barefoot and covered in what looked like blood, was carrying a crowbar and a kitchen knife. Both weapons were still wet with evidence of what he'd just done. 4 blocks away, flames were consuming the penthouse of one of Miami's most respected art dealers, along with millions of dollars in rare paintings. But the fire wouldn't hide the truth about what happened that night or why Vincent Torres thought bleach could wash away murder. If you're into true crime stories about mental illness, art world mysteries, and the forensic evidence that never lies, subscribe now and hit the bell icon. 2:15 a.m. Hartwell Art Gallery and Penthouse, Collins Avenue, Miami Beach. The fire department responded to what they thought was a routine apartment fire, but when firefighters reached the penthouse above the prestigious Hartwell Gallery, they found something that turned a fire call into a homicide investigation. Richard Hartwell lay in his bedroom, multiple stab wounds to his chest and head, blunt force trauma from what appeared to be a crowbar. Around him, priceless paintings were either destroyed by fire or splattered with blood. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong, Detective Carlos Mendez later testified. The killer had specifically targeted Hartwell, then tried to destroy the crime scene with fire. But they made one crucial mistake: they left too soon. The fire had been set in multiple locations throughout the penthouse, suggesting someone familiar with the layout. Gasoline cans were found in the kitchen and bedroom, but the killer had underestimated how long it would take for the flames to consume everything. Most importantly, they'd left behind a trail of evidence that would lead police directly to them. 2:47 a.m., Ocean Drive, Miami Beach. Officer Santos approached Vincent Torres with caution. He was talking to himself, muttering about cleaning up the mess and making the voices stop. When she asked him to drop the weapons, he complied immediately. "I didn't mean to," were his first words. "But he was poisoning my food. The paintings told me to stop him." Vincent's clothes were soaked in blood, not his own. His hands bore defensive wounds, suggesting Hartwell had fought back. Most damning of all, the crowbar and knife tested positive for Hartwell's DNA within hours. But Vincent's behavior at the scene was what really caught investigators' attention. He seemed genuinely confused about why he was being arrested, asking repeatedly when he could go home to check on his cats. "He showed classic signs of a psychotic break," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic psychiatrist who would later evaluate Vincent. But the question was whether that mental state excused his actions or simply explained them. The connection between Vincent Torres and Richard Hartwell wasn't immediately obvious. Vincent was unemployed, living in a halfway house for people with mental illness. Hartwell was worth millions, owned one of Miami's most successful galleries, and lived in a penthouse filled with museum-quality art. But they had crossed paths 6 months earlier when Vincent started attending art therapy sessions at a community center Hartwell funded. Vincent showed genuine artistic talent, creating disturbing but compelling paintings that caught Hartwell's attention. "Richard saw potential in Vincent," said Dr. Susan Martinez, who ran the art therapy program. "He'd been talking about giving Vincent a chance to display his work, maybe even sell a few pieces." Richard was always trying to help struggling artists, but Vincent's mental health had been deteriorating. He'd stopped taking his medication, started hearing voices, and developed paranoid delusions about people poisoning his food or watching him sleep. 3 weeks before the murder, Vincent had been evicted from the halfway house for erratic behavior. Hartwell, feeling sorry for him, had offered to let Vincent stay in a small apartment above the gallery's storage room. Detective Mendez's interview with Vincent revealed the fractured thinking of someone in the midst of a severe mental health crisis, but also possible attempts at manipulation. "Tell me about last night," Mendez began. "I don't remember last night," Vincent replied. "The voices were too loud. They kept telling me about the poison." "What poison in my food?" "Richard was putting things in my food to control my mind. The paintings told me. They have eyes. You know, they watch everything." But Vincent's story kept changing. First, he claimed he'd never been to Hartwell's penthouse. Then he remembered delivering paintings there. Finally, he admitted they'd had dinner together that night. "Classic cognitive dissonance," explained Dr. Walsh. His delusional thinking was competing with his awareness of reality. But the fact that he could remember specific details when pressed suggested he wasn't as impaired as he wanted us to believe. Forensic analysis painted a clear picture of what happened that night. Vincent had used his key to enter Hartwell's penthouse around 11:30 p.m. Security cameras showed him carrying the crowbar and knife, weapons he'd taken from the gallery's maintenance room. The attack was brutal but not random. Vincent had struck Hartwell at least 7 times with the crowbar, then stabbed him multiple times with the kitchen knife. The victim's defensive wounds showed he tried to fight back, but the 72-year-old was no match for his younger, stronger attacker. Most disturbing were the crime scene photos showing that Vincent had arranged some of Hartwell's paintings around the body, as if creating a macabre art installation. It suggested premeditation, Detective Mendez said. This wasn't a spontaneous psychotic episode. He'd planned this attack, brought weapons, and had enough presence of mind to try destroying evidence afterward. But Vincent's attempt to cover his tracks revealed his deteriorating mental state. After setting the fires, he'd tried to cleanse himself by pouring household bleach over his clothes and hair, believing it would destroy DNA evidence. Vincent Torres pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, setting up a classic battle between justice and mental health advocacy. His defense team brought in psychiatric experts who testified about his long history of schizophrenia, his inability to distinguish reality from delusion, and the role his untreated mental illness played in the crime. Mr. Torres was not responsible for his actions that night, argued defense attorney Lisa Chen. He was in the grip of a psychotic episode, hearing voices, seeing threats that didn't exist. He killed Richard Hartwell because he genuinely believed his life was in danger, but the prosecution painted a different picture. They highlighted Vincent's ability to plan the attack, his use of weapons from the gallery, his attempts to destroy evidence, and his inconsistent statements to police. Mental illness is not a license to kill, Prosecutor David Rodriguez told the jury. Vincent Torres knew right from wrong. He knew Richard Hartwell was trying to help him, and he repaid that kindness with murder. The jury ultimately rejected the insanity defense, finding Vincent guilty of first-degree murder, arson, and evidence tampering. Vincent Torres was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge acknowledged his mental health struggles but emphasized that they couldn't excuse the brutal murder of someone who had tried to help him. Richard Hartwell opened his home and his heart to you, Judge Patricia Williams said during sentencing. He saw talent in your art and tried to give you opportunities. Your response was to kill him and destroy irreplaceable works of art that brought joy to thousands of people. The case sparked renewed debate about mental health resources in the criminal justice system. Advocates argued that better treatment might have prevented the tragedy. Critics countered that mental illness couldn't excuse violent crime. Today, Vincent Torres remains in prison, where he's receiving psychiatric treatment for the first time in years. He's created dozens of paintings behind bars, many depicting the night he killed Richard Hartwell, suggesting he remembers far more about that evening than he initially claimed. Richard Hartwell's gallery was rebuilt and reopened as a memorial to his legacy of supporting struggling artists, but security has been significantly increased and no one is ever allowed to stay overnight in the building. The case serves as a tragic reminder that good intentions can sometimes lead to deadly consequences, and that the intersection of mental illness and violence remains one of society's most challenging problems. For more true crime stories about mental health, forensic evidence, and the complex psychology of murder, subscribe to Dark Discoveries, because sometimes the most dangerous people are those we try hardest to help.